The Heaven Sword and Dragon Saber. Author, Jin Yong. Chapter 1, Part A. She heard that the music was mixed by the singing of birds, and it seemed that the birds were singing along. Guoxiang thought, according to mother, there is a song called Empty Mountain and Songs of Birds. But this song was lost for many ages. Is it possible this is that song? The vast and mighty tour through spring is every year's winter yearning. The season of the pear blossom is nearing. The white jade brocade is without wrinkles and smells fragrantly and is mesmerizing. Snow is piling up on jade trees and jade petals. The quiet night is deep. The floating brightness is concealed through the clouds. A cold steep is enough to melt the moon. A dark silver fog illuminates heaven and earth. Her simple, natural but enchanting appearances mesmerizes me. Even greater were her will and spirit. She is like a bloom that exceeds other beautiful and fragrant flowers. Her noble spirit is clear and pure. Her immortal ability lies high. She returns to the Jade Palace and I can only see her from afar. The author of this poem, free from mediocrity, is a famous martial arts expert from the Southern Song dynasty. The name of this expert was Chu Chuji, also known as the Everlasting One. He is one of the 7 masters of Quan Zhen, and one of the most outstanding disciples of the Quan Zhen school. Chu Chuji wrote this poem after he met Xiao Longnu for the first time. She was a neighbor of Chu for many years. At this time Chu Chuji already passed away, and Xiao Longnu is the wife of the famous Condor hero Yang Guo. Another girl was reciting this poem softly, in Henan province and on Mount Shaoxi. This young girl was about 19 years old and was wearing a cream yellow robe. She was riding on a mule and was proceeding up the mountain pass. She was thinking, only someone like Sister Long is fit for him. Him of course refers to Yang Guo. After some time she softly recited, union is bliss, parting is woe, agony is boundless for a love lorn. Sweetheart, give me word. Trails of clouds drifting forward, amid mountains cupped with snow, whither shall my lonesome shadow go? This girl carried a short sword and looked travel-stained. She is a beautiful young girl who is supposed to be happy and untroubled, but somehow, she looks unhappy, melancholic. Her name is Guoxiang, is the second daughter of the great hero Guo Jing and the famous Huang Rong. Her nickname is Little Eastern Heretic. With her mule and sword she has traveled a lot. Her purpose was to forget her worries, but her traveling only increased her sorrow. Mount Shaoxi of Henan province were a set of large stone steps. These steps were constructed under the order of Emperor Gaozong of the Tang dynasty. It looked very impressive as Guoxiang proceeded up the mountain. Before long she could see the monastery. She stared at the roof for a moment and thought, the Shaolin Monastery is said to be the origin of martial arts, but why aren't there any Shaolin experts among the 5 greats? Is it because the Shaolin experts knew there weren't a match for the other experts and were afraid to disgrace Shaolin and refused to go? Or was it because the monks had evolved beyond earthly matters and didn't want to scramble for power and fame? After a while she saw a large stone tablet. Half of it was gone and the characters were unclear. Guoxiang was thinking, how come characters carved into stone can fade away through time, but my feelings carved in my heart become more and more stronger as time goes by. This tablet was bestowed by Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty. He praised the Shaolin monks for helping him suppress the rebellions. The tablet states the military credits of the Shaolin monks for helping Emperor Taizong defeat the rebel general Wang Shichong, of which 13 monks were most famous. Only 1 monk became a general and the other 12 didn't want to become officials, and Emperor Taizong bestowed 12 purple kasayas. Guoxiang was thinking, during the Sui and Tang dynasty, the Shaolin monastery was already very famous for its martial arts, and now after a few hundred years they must be even more formidable. When Guoxiang parted with Yang Guo and Xiao Longnu at Mount Hua 3 years ago, she lost all contact with them and missed them a lot. So she told her parents that she wanted to roam a bit, but in fact, she wanted to hear some news about Yang Guo. She doesn't want to actually meet them. She is very content if she can hear something about them. However, they seem to have disappeared entirely. Guoxiang has traveled from north to south and from west to east. She practically traveled through China, but still there was no news on Yang Guo. She remembered that Yang Guo asked Reverend Wuxia to bring her a present on her 16th birthday. Wuxia was a friend of Yang Guo and instructed someone to deliver Guo Xiong a present. Although she has never met him, she wants to know if he has any news about Yang Guo. She was pensive for some time till she heard some metallic noise and a voice chanting Buddhist scriptures. Through love worry will arise. Through love fear will arise. If you can free yourself from love, all worries and fear will be gone. When Guo Xiong heard this, she was completely dazzled, and softly repeated those words. The metallic noise and the chanting were becoming distant. Guo Xiong said, I must ask him, how I can free myself from love and how my worries and fear will disappear. She tied her mule to a tree and chased after the sound. Guo Xiong caught with the monk and was shocked to see the monk carrying two large iron buckets, and he was chained on his hands, feet, and neck, causing him to produce a metallic sound as he walked. The buckets were filled with water, and it showed that the monk must possess extraordinary strength. Guo Xiong spoke to the monk, I have a few questions, please stop for a while. The monk turned around and both Guo Xiong and the monk were surprised to see each other. The monk was Zhu Yuan. 3 years ago Guo Xiong met him on Mount Hua. Guo Xiong also knew that this monk was really pedantic, but had extremely powerful internal energy not inferior to any top martial arts expert of his time. She spoke to him, oh, it is you Reverend Zhu Yuan. What happened to you? Zhu Yuan smiled and nodded but didn't speak. He turned around and walked away again. Guo Xiong said, it's me, Guo Xiong. Don't you recognize me anymore? Zhu Yuan turned his head and smiled and nodded but didn't stop. Guo Xiong asked, who chained you? Why do they torture you? Zhu Yuan raised his left hand and shook his hand in admonition, meaning do not ask. Guo Xiong wouldn't let this matter rest until she got to the bottom of this, and wanted to run in front of Zhu Yuan but was not successful. Although Zhu Yuan was carrying two large buckets of water, he was still very quick. Guo Xiong was amused and leapt up and wanted to grab one of the buckets, but she missed by an inch. Guo Xiong said, you have very impressive abilities, but I must catch up with you. Zhu Yuan continued to walk and the metallic noise sounded rather melodic. Guo Xiong was having difficulty keeping up and she was really impressed. Both my father and mother praised this monk for his superior martial arts. At that time I wasn't totally convinced, but now I know they were right. After a while, Zhu Yuan walked to the back of a small house and emptied the buckets of water in an old well. Guo Xiong asked, what are you doing? Why are you emptying the water in this well? Zhu Yuan remained calm and shook his head. Guo Xiong thought she understood now and smiled, you're learning some sort of powerful martial arts, aren't you? Zhu Yuan shook his head again. Guo Xiong was feeling a bit angry now and said, I just heard you chanting, you're not dumb, why won't you answer me? Zhu Yuan put his palms together and looked apologetic and carried the buckets and walked away again. Guo Xiong looked into the well and couldn't find anything strange about it and stared at Zhu Yuan's back and felt puzzled. She gave chase for a while but soon she felt tired and rested on a rock. She was admiring the scenery and felt very fresh afterwards. Guo Xiong was thinking, I wonder where the pupil of this monk is. The pupil will probably tell me what is going here. She started going down again and wanted to find Zhang Junbao, the pupil of Zhu Yuan. She walked for a while and soon she heard that metallic sound again. Zhu Yuan came up again and Guo Xiong quickly hid and thought, I'll spy on him and see what he is up to. The metallic sound was becoming clearer and she saw Zhu Yuan reading a book. She silently approached him and called out, what are you reading? Zhu Yuan was startled and cried out, you gave me a scare, it's only you. Guo Xiong smiled, you're not pretending to be a dumb anymore. Zhu Yuan looked slightly afraid and looked to the left and right and shook his hand. Guo Xiong asked, what is wrong? Before Zhu Yuan could answer, two monks in grey robes appeared out of the woods. One was very tall, the other one short. The Tao monks sternly said to Zhu Yuan, you broke the rules by talking to an outsider and furthermore to a young girl. Come with us to see the elder of the disciplinary hall. Zhu Yuan looked crestfallen and nodded and started walking behind those two monks. Guo Xiong was angry and annoyed and sternly reproached, what kind of rule forbids people from talking? I know this reverend and if I want to talk to him, it's no concern to you. The Tao monk gave her an arrogant look and said, for more than 1,000 years, the Shaolin monastery doesn't allow women to enter. I suggest that Miss would leave before you get yourself in trouble. Guo Xiong became even more angry and said, "So what about women? Aren't women humans? And why do you pester Reverend Zhu Yuan? How come he is chained and you forbid him to talk to anyone?" The monk coldly replied, "These are the rules of our monastery, no one has the right to question, not even the emperor. Miss, needn't bother." Guo Xiong angrily said, "Reverend Zhu Yuan is an honest good person, you're bullying him because he's a nice man. Where are Reverend Tianming, the monks Wuxia and Wu Xiang?" The two monks were shocked. Reverend Tianming is the abbot of Shaolin, Wuxia is the elder of the Luohan Hall and Wu Xiang is the elder of the Demo Hall. The three of them are very respected, all the monks address them as Old Abbot, Elder of the Luohan Hall or Elder of the Demo Hall. No one has dared to call out their names, and today these two monks hear this young girl calling out their names and creating a scene. These two monks are the pupils of the Elder of the Disciplinary Hall, and received orders to keep an eye on Zhu Yuan. But now they see Guo Xiong interfering. The tall monk yelled, "If you don't leave now, we will not be friendly." Guo Xiong said, "Should I be afraid of you? Hurry up and free Zhu Yuan of his chains or else I will go to old monk Tianming." The short monk became angry now and saw Guo Xiong's sword. He said, "Leave your weapon behind and we will not take actions against you. Leave now." Guo Xiong removed her sword and held them in her hands and scoffed, "All right then, I will comply." The short monk grew up in the Shaolin monastery and heard his seniors say that Shaolin was the origin of all martial arts, and no matter how respected or how skilled, martial arts experts never carried weapons to the Shaolin monastery. Although this young girl didn't actually reach the monastery, but she was already on Shaolin premises. He thought this young girl was afraid and presented her sword, so he reached out to grab the sword. However, when his fingers touched the scabbard, he felt a painful tingling, like being struck by lightning. He felt a strong force coming from the sword and pushing him backward. He couldn't maintain his stand and fell down. As he was standing on a slope, he soon rolled down a few meters. With some difficulty, he could stop himself from rolling anymore. The Tao monk was shocked and angry and yelled out, "Of all the nerves! How dare you come to Shaolin to wreak havoc!" He turned his body in and advanced one step in front, and his right fist aimed at Guo Xiong. His left hand was put on the back of the fist, causing two palms striking down. This was the 28th technique of dashing Shaolin, namely turning over split. Guo Xiong held onto her sword and pressed down her sword with scabbard and all to the monk's shoulder. The monk held onto the sword. Zhu Yuan was very frantic and called out, "Stop! Don't fight!" The monk tried to pull the sword over. Suddenly he felt a shock through his palm and both arms felt numb. He cried, "No!" Guo Xiong swept her left leg and kicked him down the slope. He was somewhat more injured than the other monk, his face was bleeding. Guo Xiong was thinking, "I came to Shaolin to find some information on Brother Yang, but now I'm engaged in a fight for no apparent reason." She saw Zhu Yuan looking sad. She pulled out her sword and cut the chains. Zhu Yuan was screaming, "No, you mustn't." For a few times, Guo Xiong cut 3 chains and said, "Those 2 wicked monks will go back for reinforcements. We must go now. Where is your little disciple?" Zhu Yuan kept shaking his hands. Suddenly a voice came from behind saying, "Thank you for carrying Miss Guo, I'm right here." Guo Xiong turned around and saw a 17-year-old man standing there. He had thick eyebrows and big eyes and was very tall, but still looked very young. She met him 3 years ago at Mount Hua. He was Zhang Junbao. He was taller this time compared to 3 years ago, but he very much looked the same. Guo Xiong was very pleased and said, "Those nasty monks were bullying your teacher, we must go now." Zhu Yuan laughed wryly and shook his head and suggested that Guo Xiong should quickly leave now before trouble comes. Guo Xiong knows that there were an uncountable amount of Shaolin experts that were superior to her, but seeing this situation she couldn't leave this matter alone, and she was worried that Shaolin experts would stop them. So she pulled Zhu Yuan in one hand and the other Zhang Junbao and told them, "Hurry up, we'll discuss everything when we leave this place." But the two of them just stood still. At this time 7-8 monks with wooden rods came up the slope and yelled, "Who is that audacious girl? How dare she come to Shaolin and behave atrociously?" Zhang Junbao called out, "Please don't be rude, this is..." Guo Xiong hurriedly said, "Don't say my name." She knew that she created a big scene today and perhaps this might even escalate, so she didn't want to drag her parents into this. She added, "Let's go the other way. Don't mention my parents' name." But another 7, 8 monks came towards them. Guoxiang saw that they were surrounded and raised her elegant eyebrows and said to Zhu Yuan and Zhang, "The both of you are so fussy, you lack a hero spirit. Do you want to leave now?" Zhang Junbao said, "Master, Miss Guo has only good intentions." At this point 4 monks came up the slope, although they didn't carry weapons, but judging their body posture they were experts. Guoxiang knew that using force would be futile, so she just stood still and waited to see what would happen. The first monk walked up and spoke to Guoxiang. The elder of the Luo Han Hall ordered that the intruder was to lay down her weapon and was to be taken to the Yi Wei Pavilion for questioning. Guoxiang scoffed, "The monks of Shaolin have mastered the air of government officials. All of you speak a bureaucratic tone. I'm wondering whether you're officials to the Song Emperor or officials to the Mongolian Emperor?" At this time, the entire northern territories of China were in hands of the Mongolians. The Shaolin monastery fell under Mongolian jurisdiction. However, the Mongolians were busy deploying their troops, so they had no time to control any temples, monasteries. Everything in Shaolin remained the same. The monk felt embarrassed by Guoxiang's remarks and his face turned red, and he felt that giving orders to outsiders was not very appropriate. He put his palms together and said, "May I inquire what business you have here, benefactress? Would you please lay down your weapon and go to the Yi Wei Pavilion where tea will be served, and we have some questions we would like to ask." Guoxiang heard his tone became a bit more friendly and thought this would be a good chance to stop and said, "I don't care if you let me enter or not. It's not like Shaolin has any treasure and I'm not willing to benefit from it." She turns to Zhang Junbao and quietly asked, "Are coming or not?" Zhang Junbao shook his head and looked at his teacher, saying his place is here. Guoxiang loudly said, "All right then, I will not interfere. I'm off," and started walking down the slope. The first monk moved away, but 2 other monks blocked her and said, "Lay down your sword." Guoxiang raised her eyebrows and put her hand on the hilt. The first monk explained, "We don't want to keep your weapon, we will return it when you leave Mount Shaoxi. This is our rule, please forgive us." Guoxiang heard his tone was polite and thought, "If I don't leave my sword, there is bound to be a fight, and alone I'm no match for these monks. But if I leave my sword, I will disgrace my parents, brother Yang, sister Long and my grandfather." She was still thinking, and suddenly a figure appeared in front of her and shouted, "You come here with a weapon, injured 2 of our disciples. What's the meaning of this?" And he formed a claw and grabbed Guoxiang's sword. If this monk didn't use force, Guoxiang would surely hand over her sword after some consideration. She isn't like her elder sister Guofu. Although she is straightforward, she is not rash. Seeing this disadvantage, she would have complied and discussed this matter with her parents and Huang Yaoxi and come back for an explanation. But now this monk used force, how can she watch her sword being grabbed away? The monk's grip was firm and he held on to the scabbard. He wanted to quickly disarm her, because it would not be proper for a monk to be pulling and pushing with a pretty young girl. Guoxiang couldn't hold on to the scabbard and pulled out her sword. The monk used his right hand to seize the scabbard, but his 2 fingers on his left hand were cut off. The other monks were angry when they saw their martial arts brother wounded and picked up their wooden rods, cudgels and attacked. Guoxiang knew that she had no choice but to fight now and used descending flower swordsmanship to defend herself. The descending flower swordsmanship was derived from Huang Yaoxi's divine descending flower sword bombs. Although this swordsmanship is not as refined and excellent as the jade flute swordsmanship, it was still a special technique from the Peach Blossom Island. The monks saw green flashes surging, the sword dancing, making it seem like flowers descending. In a few moments, 2 monks were injured. But other monks took their places and soon Guoxiang was completely surrounded. She would have been overwhelmed if not for the fact that the monks were benevolent and not willing to harm her life. All their stances were to immobilize her and not to kill her, so they would lecture her and escort her away from here. Also, all the monks saw that this young girl had learned superior martial arts, and they thought that she must be either the daughter of famous martial arts experts or at least the disciple of a skilled martial arts expert. So they didn't want to make any enemies, so every stance was rather limited. Some monks went to notify the elder of the Luohan Hall. In the heat of the battle, an old Tao monk came and observed the fight with a smile on his face. 2 monks approached him and told him something. Guoxiang was panting and her swordsmanship was becoming disorderly, and she yelled out, "What origin of martial arts? 10 monks surrounding 1 person, what a way to win!" That old monk was the elder of the Luohan Hall, Reverend Wuxia. When he heard this he said, "Stand back everyone." All the monks jumped away. Reverend Wuxia asked, "What is your name, miss? And who is your father and teacher? What business do you have here at Shaolin?" Guoxiong was thinking, I can't tell him my name. And I cannot reveal my reason in front of so many people. If my parents and brother Yang found out the mess I created they will be upset. The best thing to do is sneak away. She answered, "I can't tell you my name, I just came here to enjoy the scenery. I never guessed that the Shaolin Monastery was even stricter than the Imperial Palace. With no reason your weapon will be confiscated. I would like to ask, did I enter the monastery?" When Master Damo taught Shaolin martial arts he just wanted the monks to improve their conditions and concentrate on their meditation through martial arts. But when Shaolin became more and more famous, and their martial arts kept improving, now the Shaolin monks rely on martial arts to flaunt their superiority. "Well, you can have my sword, and if you don't kill me, everyone in the realm of martial arts will know what happened today." Guoxiong is famous for being clever and fluent. This entire matter was actually her fault, but with those words she rendered Reverend Wuxia speechless. She thought, I don't want anyone to know about this, and it seems that Shaolin doesn't want the outside world to know about this incident either. A group of 10 monks attacking a young girl will not do their reputation any good. She threw her sword on the ground and started walking away. Reverend Wuxia walked up and used his sleeve to pick the sword and said, "Miss, I will return your sword and see you off respectfully." Guoxiong smiled sweetly and said, "It seems that you're very reasonable. That's more like it. That's the style a martial arts expert should have." Seeming that she won, Guoxiong just praised this old monk and reached out to get her sword back. When she wanted to pull back, she noticed it didn't move an inch. She used strength 3 times but in vain, and she said, "You're deliberately displaying your martial arts." Suddenly her left hand curled up and softly wanted to brush against Wuxia's 2 left cheek acupoints, namely Tianding and Jigu. Wuxia moved away and released his grip. Guoxiong quickly seized her sword. Wuxia said, "Very impressive whisking acupoint orchid hand. May I ask how you address the Lord of the Peach Blossom Island?" Guoxiong laughed, "The Lord of the Peach Blossom Island? I call him Old Eastern Heretic." Huang Yaoshi is her maternal grandfather. He is a strange, eccentric man and he calls his granddaughter Little Eastern Heretic and Guoxiong calls him Old Eastern Heretic. Huang Yaoshi is not angry when he hears it and he is even happy when he hears it. Wuxia was a robber in his early years. Although he has studied Zen for many years and has profound Buddhist knowledge, he still is very straightforward, otherwise, he couldn't be friends with Yang Guo. Seeing that this little girl is not willing to tell him, he wants to test her and find out. He smiled and said, "Young miss, if you can withstand 10 of my stances, I can guess your school." Guoxiong asked, "What if you cannot?" Wuxia laughed and said, "Well, if you can withstand 10 of my stances, I will have to listen to you." Guoxiong pointed at Zhu Yuan and said, "I met this Reverend Zhu Yuan some years ago and I want to plead on his behalf. If I can withstand 10 of your stances you have to promise not to give him any more trouble." Wuxia was surprised. He knew that Zhu Yuan was very pedantic and stayed in the library and watched over the scriptures and never met any outsiders. How did he meet this young girl? Wuxia said, "We never did give him any trouble. He is sitting out his punishment, that is not giving him trouble." Guoxiong pouted and scoffed, "It seems to me that you just want to go back on your word." Wuxia clapped his hands and said, "Very well, if I lose I will carry 3,108 buckets of water for Zhu Yuan. Watch out, here I come." Guoxiong was thinking when she spoke to him, this old monk seems to be a true expert. If he starts to attack first, I will have to try my best to defend myself and will reveal my parents' martial arts. The best thing to do is for me to attack first and try to gain the upper hand. When she heard him say "Watch out, here I come," she didn't give him time to attack first and raised her sword and aimed for his chest. This was a technique from the descending flower swordsmanship, namely thousands and myriads of purple and red. The tip of the sword kept moving, not revealing to the opponent where the sword was aiming for. Guoxiong yelled out, "The second stance." The short sword turned around and came from bottom to top. This was called the celestial gentry topping apart, which was a Quanzhen technique. Wuxia said, "Good, Quanzhen sword technique." Guoxiong said, "Not necessarily. Her short sword stabbed into the air and saw Wuxia using an attack as a defense and using his fingers to grab her wrist. She was a bit afraid. This old monk is very formidable, he can attack barehanded under such a dangerous technique. Seeing his fingers were coming closer, her sword dazzled a few times and used a technique from the dog beating stick, namely Mean Hound blocking the road. And this stance belonged to the sealing formula. Guo Xiong was close friends with the deceased leader of the Beggars Association Liu Zhao. They occasionally drank wine and played mora together. Sometimes Liu would demonstrate his martial arts, although the dog beating stick is only permitted to be used and learnt by the leader of the Beggars Association. Guo Xiong could learn a few stances from Liu. Furthermore, her mother Huang Rong and her brother-in-law were leaders of the Beggars Association. So she has seen this style a lot and could trick people into believing that she knew this style although she didn't know the exact secret of it. Wuxia's fingers just reached her wrist but he saw a bright light shining and the blade was coming towards his fingers in an excellently beautiful way, almost cutting off his 5 fingers, but luckily his martial arts were high and he could avoid the attack by pacing back 2 steps. But his left sleeve was split. Wuxia looked terrified and cold sweat was breaking out. Guo Xiong was very amused and smiled. What sword style is this? In fact, this wasn't a sword technique, she just used a stance from the dog beating stick and used it as a sword stance. Because this style was magnificent, even Guo Xiong couldn't completely learn it, it was still capable to scare off this martial arts expert of Shaolin. Guo Xiong thought, if I learned a few more stances from the dog beating stick I could easily defeat this old monk. She didn't give Wuxia time to catch his breath and advanced forward. Her sword was slightly raised and she floated towards him. Her posture looked like a floating fairy, the blade was pointing at Wuxia's legs. This was called a small orchard for chrysanthemum which belonged to the Jade Maiden swordsmanship. Guo Xiong learnt this technique from Xiaolong, Nu. The Jade swordsmanship was created by Lin Zhaoying. This style was not only swift and fierce but also refined, elegant and beautiful. All the monks never saw something that beautiful, they were all surprised and pleased. Because Shaolin sword styles were firm and fierce, for example, Luohan and Demo swordsmanship. This Jade Maiden swordsmanship was hardly known throughout the world of martial arts. The essence of it is the opposite of Shaolin styles but when it comes to superiority of the stances, it is not above Shaolin swordsmanship. But this technique was absolutely beautiful and celestial. Even in Buddhist scriptures it is mentioned, when the appearances are gracious and charming, when the manner is solemn, gentle and elegant, and behavior proper and gratifying, the watcher will not be bored. Reverend Wuxia was impressed by such a magnificent stance and hoped to see it more clearly so he moved away and waited till Guo Xiong attacked again. Guo Xiong's technique now was changing directions a few times from east to west and from west to east. Zhang Junbao was mesmerized by it and was surprised to recognize this stance as extend in all directions. 3 years ago Yang Guo taught Zhang Junbao this technique and Guo Xiong was there to see it and now is using it. This was originally a palm technique, now she used it as a sword stance. The power of this stance was not that powerful anymore but it was a very strange sword stance and Wuxia was a bit frightened by it. They reached the 5th stance now, and Wuxia didn't have any idea who she was. In his younger years, he roamed the world and gained a lot of martial arts experience and insight. And now he is the elder of the Luohan Hall for more than 10 years and has examined all styles of different schools and compared to Shaolin martial arts. So he was always very confident to recognize the martial arts of any expert within a few stances. His limit with Guo Xiong of 10 stances was already a very big margin. He never guessed that the parents, relatives, friends of Guo Xiong were all top martial arts experts and she learned a few stances of each and every one of them, causing Wuxia to be confused. Wuxia now thought, the only way for me now is to attack with strength, forcing to use her own martial arts to defend herself. If not, I cannot even guess her school after 100 stances. He turned around and used double piercing hands and 2 fists aimed for Guo Xiong. She saw that his attack was fierce and didn't dare to block it and twisted her body and glided away from that attack. She remembered when Yinggu fought against Yang Guo, Yinggu used this style. Wuxia praised, good movement. Try another stance. His left hand curled up like a flower, bending his left elbow in front of his chest and this was another Shaolin fist stance. This stance completely sealed Guo Xiong. She turned around her sword and used the sword as her finger and displayed the Yi Yang finger. She learnt this technique from her martial arts brother, Wu Shuwen. and she aimed for 3 of Wuxie's acupoint of his wrist. Although she only learned the mere basics of Yi-Yang finger, this technique of sealing 3 acupoints in one go was one of the key points of Yi-Yang finger. Reverend Yi Deng's Yi-Yang finger was renowned through the world. Wuxia recognized it and quickly changed stance. However, if Wuxia didn't change technique, and let Guoxiang touch his 3 acupoints, he would have known that her Yi-Yang finger was far from perfect. But in a fight he wasn't willing to risk his reputation and name for it. Guoxiang smiled sweetly and said, "You recognize a powerful technique when you see it." Wuxia grunted and used a stance called Single Phoenix, glaring at the sun. With this stance, Wuxia used both hands to knock out Guoxiang's sword. She knew that he wouldn't really harm her, but was still frightened and used Zhou Bo Tong's Kongming fist to counter it. This Kongming fist was quite new to the martial arts realm, so Wuxia didn't recognize it and turned to another stance, namely siding to the 7 stars flower. One of his palms was up, the other down, and pressed down on Guoxiang. If she didn't use internal energy to block it, her hands would be snapped. Guoxiang thought, "Do you really want to break my hands?" and used an iron palm technique to block this attack. She learned this stance from Wu Shuwen's wife, Wang Yanping. This stance was created by the famous Chu Qianren, and this palm technique was known to be number 1 for being violent and fierce. Wuxia was shocked to see a young girl using the iron palm technique and quickly withdrew his attack. First of all, he didn't want to harm her. Second, he was quite afraid for the iron palm technique. Guoxiang smiled sweetly. "This is the 10th stance, guess what school I belong to?" and attacked Wuxia with a simple Shaolin fist called the Sea of Bitterness Has No Bounds. This stance belonged to the Luohan fist style, and Wuxia was both angry and amused to see this. And he quickly used another stance to block it and lift her up. This was called Carry the Mountain and Leap Over the Ocean. But when he did that, he realized, "I'm only wanted to win her and cannot recognize her school." She used 10 different stances. What can I say? I surely can't say she belongs to Shaolin. Guoxiang was yelling, "Let me go." And something dropped out of her clothes. Guoxiang yelled again, "Let me go, you old monk." Wuxia was an enlightened monk. He believed all creatures were the same. He made no differences in men and women. He even treated animals with care. He said, "I'm old enough to be your grandfather. What are you afraid of?" He gently flicked his arm and Guoxiang landed a few meters further. He was about to admit defeat, when he saw 2 small dark iron figures of 2 arhats and picked them up. Guoxiang asked him, "Well, do you admit defeat?" Wuxia looked very pleased and said, "Why should I admit defeat? Your father is the great hero Guojing, your mother is the heroine Huang Rong. Your grandfather is Lord Huang of the Peach Blossom Island. Your second Miss Guoxiang. Your father learned martial arts from the 7 eccentrics of Jiangnan, Peach Blossom Island, Northern Beggar and the Quanzhen School. No wonder Miss Guo has such profound knowledge of martial arts." Guoxiang was stunned. This old monk is very formidable. I used 10 different stances, but he was still able to know who I was. Wuxia smiled and said, "Miss Guo, I recognized you from these 2 arhat statues. How is Brother Yang?" Guoxiang was shocked for a moment and said, "You must be Reverend Wuxia. You gave me these 2 arhats as a present to me. The reason I came here was to find out some news of Brother Yang and Sister Long." Wuxia said, "Many years ago, Master Yang came to our monastery and stayed for a few days. And when he left for Xiangyang, he asked me to help him. But I don't know where he is now." It seems that both Guoxiang and Wuxia didn't know where Yang Guo was. Guoxiang was stunned for a moment and said, "Not even you know where he is now? I wonder who does know." Guoxiang thanked him for his present. These 2 arhats were made by a carpenter monk of Shaolin. These 2 arhats could display a set of Luohan fist if you activate the mechanism. That's why Guoxiang knew that Shaolin fist. Wuxia laughed and said, "Because of the rules of our monastery I cannot invite you stay, however I will walk you down. Please forgive us." Guoxiang was pensive and said, "It doesn't matter, I asked what I came for anyway." Wuxia said, "As for my Buddhist brother Zhu Yuan, I will explain later. You know what, we will find a good inn and talk these things over by a good meal and some wine." Reverend Wuxia was highly respected by the Shaolin monks, and they were all puzzled to see him being so respectful towards a young girl. Guoxiang said, "No need for that, I'm sorry that injured a few reverends. Please forgive me for being rash." I will leave now and I hope to see you again." Wuxia laughed and said, "I'm adamant, I will see you off. I'm sorry I couldn't attend your 16th birthday that year. After burning down the supplies and the gunpowder of the Mongolian army I left without going to Xiangyang." Guoxiang knew he had good intentions, and liked his straightforward manner and was very eager to make friends with him and said, "Good." After the two of them walked for a while and passed the Yi pavilion. They heard footsteps behind them. When they turned around to look they saw Zhang Junbao. Guoxiang smiled and said, "Brother Zhang, did you come to see me off too?" Zhang Junbao blushed and said, "Yes." Suddenly another monk ran towards Wuxia looking rather hectic. Wuxia frowned his eyebrows and said, "Why are you so frantic?" That monk went to Wuxia and said something very quietly. Wuxia's face changed and said, "Really?" The monk said, "The abbot asked Master Wuxia to return now and to discuss matter." Guoxiang saw that Wuxia looked worried and told him, "If you have something to do now, feel free to go back. Real friends don't need all those formalities, we can always eat and drink another time." Wuxia looked pleased and said, "No wonder Master Yang speaks highly of you. You're a true heroine, today you've made a friend." Guoxiang smiled and said, "You're already friends with Brother Yang. That makes you my friend too." The two parted and Wuxia went back. Guoxiang continued to walk down. Zhang Junbao didn't dare to walk next to her and kept 5 steps in between them. Guoxiang asked, "Why do they punish your teacher?" Zhang Junbao said, "The rules of the monastery are very strict, if the monks break them they have to be punished." Guoxiang asked, "What did your teacher do wrong? He's a very nice man." Zhang sighed, "It is all because of the Nijia scripture that was lost." Guoxiang said, "You mean the scripture that was stolen by Xiao Xiongzi and Yin Ke Sing?" Zhang said, "Yes, that day at Mount Hua, I searched them and found nothing even with the help of Master Yang. After we left the mountain we couldn't find them anymore. We returned to the monastery and reported it to the abbot. Because that scripture was written by Master De Mo, the elder of the disciplinary hall blamed my teacher for not paying better attention to the scriptures and heavily punished him." Guoxiang sighed, "This is blaming it on someone else. Why should Reverend Zhu Yuan be punished for it? Because of this they ordered your teacher to fill that well and forbade him to speak." Zhang said, "This is an old punishment of Shaolin. According to the elders, this punishment can also be seen as good form of self-cultivation." Guoxiang laughed, "It seems I'm a busybody." Zhang quickly said, "We will always remember Miss Guo's help and intentions." Guoxiang sighed and thought, "But someone has completely forgotten about me." After a while they reached the place where Guoxiang tied her mule and she said, "Brother Zhang, you needn't see me off anymore." Zhang Junbao looked reluctant to part and didn't know what to say to Guoxiang. Guoxiang took out her 2 arhats and gave them to Zhang Junbao, "Here, take it." Zhang Junbao didn't take it and said, I. Guoxiang said, "I'm giving it to you, so take it." Zhang Junbao said, I. Guoxiang put them in his hands and mounted the mule. Suddenly someone called out, "Miss Guo, please wait." It was Reverend Wuxia. Guoxiang thought, this old monk was too formal. Wuxia reached Guoxiang in a few moments and told Zhang Junbao, "Return to the monastery, don't stroll about." Zhang Junbao said yes and stared at Guoxiang for a short while and quickly left. Wuxia waited till he was gone and took out a note and said, "Miss Guo, do you know who wrote this note?" Guoxiang took the note and read it. Shaolin martial arts have been proclaimed to be invincible throughout China for many years. 10 days from now, the 3 saints of Kunlun will see all Shaolin skills. The handwriting was very strong. Guoxiang asked, "Who are these the 3 saints of Kunlun? They sound very arrogant." Wuxia said, "You don't know them?" Guoxiang shook her head and said, "No, I don't know them. I have not heard my parents mention this name before." Wuxia said, "That's the strange thing about it." Guoxiang asked, "What is strange?" Wuxia said, "Miss Guo, we are now friends and I will be honest with you. Do you know who brought this note?" Guoxiang answered, "Probably a messenger from the 3 saints of Kunlun." Wuxia said, "If it was, I'm not that surprised. Shaolin has been the leading martial arts school in Wulin for hundreds of years. So many martial arts experts come here to challenge us, but we always treat our guests with courtesy. And we try to avoid fighting as much as possible, because if we battled every expert who came here for a fight, We wouldn't have time for our cultivation. Guoxiong nodded and said, "That's true.